Hi everyone, and welcome to PHAMCAST. I am so excited as we are on what I like to call Pham Eve, on the eve of Preventative Health Awareness Month, and I am honored to be the visionary behind this incredible movement that's gaining momentum both across the country and even across the border. And today we have a very special show, so hang tight and listen to this. We have a very special episode of PHAMCAST today during Preventative Health Awareness Month. I'm deeply honored to have a truly inspiring guest with us today, Kyla Fox, a visionary leader and the founder of the Kyla Fox Center. As one of our esteemed FAMbassadors, Kyla's incredible work and dedication to the field of eating disorders and recovery make her a perfect guest to join us for our inaugural Eating Disorders Day during Pham 2025. Kyla's personal journey is a powerful one. In her late teens, she struggled with anorexia and an over-exercise addiction, desperately needing medical and therapeutic support. But despite the urgency of her situation, she faced a healthcare system that lacked immediate access to care she so desperately needed. With long wait lists and limited professionals who truly understand eating disorders, Kyla was left to navigate recovery on her own. A challenge no one ever should have to face. Her experience fueled a lifelong passion to change the system. Today, through the Kyla Fox Center, she has created a space where people affected by eating disorders can receive comprehensive, individualized treatment when they need it the most. Her vision is to offer compassionate, accessible care from professionals who truly understand the struggles of those affected by eating disorders, empowering individuals to choose the path of healing that resonate deeply with them. Kyla's qualifications are just as remarkable as her vision. She holds a Master's in Social Work from the University of Toronto, an Honours Bachelor's of Arts in Women's Study, and is a member of the Ontario Association of Social Workers. Her work has extended beyond the clinic as a public speaker, educator, writer, and advocate, all while being a media expert on eating disorders. Kyla is passionate about breaking the silence and stigmas surrounding eating disorders. We are unbelievably fortunate to have her with us in studio today, and I cannot wait to dive in. Welcome.
Thank you. What an introduction. Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be here.
Well, and it's deserving.
Thank you.
Because when I first was introduced to you by a colleague and friend and mutual connection of ours, Dr. Christy Prowse, I immediately knew that I had to meet you and knew that I wanted to have you part of this preventative health movement. We all have a story, and your story is a very powerful one. And I would love it if you could share with all of our listeners and viewers a little bit about your story with eating disorder and sort of the foundation of why you are where you are today.
In my late teens and early 20s, I suffered with extreme restriction and over-exercise addiction. And this was sort of catapulted at a time in my life where I felt really out of control. I wasn't sure about the direction I needed to go into. There was a lot of internal chaos and trauma things that I was facing. And I thought that, you know what, if I start to just maybe exercise a little bit more, I would be able to relieve myself of some of the stress and anxiety that I was experiencing. And so that's just what I decided to do. And objectively, it actually was seen as pretty healthy. Right? And really normalized and really supported. So I would just engage in more exercise, and then suddenly those exercise patterns started to really take over me. I wasn't able to not do it, and I had to up the ante of that. And then with that, there was a lot of changes that I was making to my diet simultaneously. So excessive exercise and restriction of food became a primary focus, and over time, in a short amount of time, actually, within about 6 months, I was completely overtaken by these rules and rituals, to the point where I couldn't function. I was physically debilitated, mentally and emotionally trapped in this prison of rules and rituals. And so I think sometimes when we think about eating disorders, it's important to remember that they start often quite innocently and not with the intention to want to change the body. Something in life might be leading someone to engage in these kinds of patterns. And so over many months after this, I was not able to break out of these rituals. I was in so much harm. I couldn't get out of my life. I couldn't get out of this imprisoning way that I was living. And I became very, very unwell. It was physically very apparent. My parents were obviously aware, but I think there was a level of naivete, not really understanding how severe my rules were, not understanding how trapped I felt. And we looked for support, but there really wasn't anything accessible in our healthcare system. I would have had to have waited on wait lists for hospital-based care for at least 6 to 12 months, which these days is even more so than that. Mm-hmm. And when I would seek out professionals that claimed they really understood eating disorders, I would go there and I would speak with them and I would tell them all the things that I knew they needed to hear. And I was never really called out on it. And so I realized that I wasn't receiving the care that I needed, and it wasn't really available to me.
I don't want to interrupt your story, but right away, how courageous. Because as a young girl and suffering, and I'm sure there's a lot of emotions wrapped around that, from shame to fear to all of those things, it takes courage to keep pushing through. Continue and tell us, how did you do that?
I don't really actually know. Right. I think I had this awareness that if I didn't make changes, and I had been in these patterns for at least a year at this point, if I didn't make changes, I was going to die. I knew that was headed my way, and I knew that my life was becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think that threat and that fear was very real for me. And I also think internally, I knew that there was something more for me than that. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be able to have that opportunity to seek that out. And so that was always a driver for me, is to get through this. And I think I always knew, despite how stuck I felt, I think I always knew I would. I always believed I would. And so over the course of searching and navigating to try to find professionals to help me, I wasn't able to do it. And so my family kind of created treatment with me in our home. My parents really stepped in, did a lot of refeeding, did a lot of symptom interruption. And I started to actually realize that the patterns that I had with food and exercise were really just an extension of much deeper things in my life. That I think food and body behaviors are really rooted quite deeply in people, in our stories, in our belief system, and our self-concept. And while I was able to force myself and push myself to refeed and to sort of minimize the rituals around my exercise, I was able to start to confront the things that were really at the core of why I was hurting myself in the first place. And I always say that when someone is hurting themselves, they don't really like themselves, because right. I think that when you really like yourself, you don't hurt yourself.
Right.
And so the quest for changing and understanding eating disorders, and I felt like I really could understand what it meant to be trapped by these voices and this noise. And when I share my story, it's such a long time ago now that I often feel like it's portrayed as maybe sort of like I just signed up to do these different things and my parents kind of joined me and we all did it. It was tremendous, and it was awful, and it was a struggle for a very, very long time. Yeah. Until the pattern started to shift and change.
Well, what struck me with what you just said, and what's so powerful and inspiring, and actually makes me a bit tearful as a parent, is that your family had to figure this out. And no wonder it took a long time, and how, can you shed some light a little bit on that in terms of how, it was a process, and like you said, when years go by, you can look like it was easy. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that. And for those that are struggling right now, in the same position that you were in, they need to hear. Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about what that was like for your family and how they did that? You mentioned refeeding and things, but can you really dive in a little bit more about that? Because I think that's an important part of this story.
I think that we probably lived in so much chaos and conflict at the time, because my family was pushing me to fight these rules and rituals, and I would be pushing back. So it was just an endless amount of stress and fear and anxiety. I mean,
for everyone.
For everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to remember. When someone you love has an eating disorder, they have the active food and body symptoms, but everybody around them them has an eating disorder as well.
Yes.
They're on the emotional roller coaster with you. They're just maybe not engaging with food and body in the same way, but they're on the same exact path in terms of the complexity of it and the stress of it.
Yes, that journey you're walking together, and it's like that in any type of addiction. You know, as a therapist, I've done a lot of work with addictions, and I certainly have had the honor of treating people with eating disorders, and the mind-body connection and the power of touch and the role that it plays, which we're going to dive into a little bit later. But you're so right, like it is, and I think, thank you for validating that, and because I know that there are going to be families at home of a loved one who's struggling with an eating disorder, and it's really important to talk about that and to really have candid conversations, soulful, honest conversations about the reality of this, which is why the work that you're doing I find so important, and why I'm so excited to have you on the show, because you're right, you're filling a gap that hasn't been there for a very long time.
Well, I think sometimes people feel like, you know, often that person with the eating disorder needs to go and get help. But what I think we don't realize is that if you love someone who's suffering, there's so much work that you can do in order to then translate their ability to get help if they're not ready or unwilling. So we work with families, we work with loved ones, we work with parents all the time. And part of that was sort of built into when I was suffering and sort of watching my parents and my brothers move through the intensity of what it meant to help get me well.
Yes.
Which was ongoing.
And so once you sort of got through that really difficult and challenging time, how did you take the next step to want to actually be part of the solution and create change for others? That takes courage. Like, where did that come from? How did that start?
You know, I think that so much of the eating disorder for me was built in just really lacking self-worth and really lacking a sense of direction. And throughout my recovery, I enrolled in this women's studies course at the University of Toronto. So my eating disorder sort of fell into when I had started my undergrad, and I felt really lost and didn't know which way to go. But when I was in my recovery, there was this random course around in women's studies around women abuse, and I don't know what drew me to it, but I was intrigued, and so I enrolled in this course. And the professor was this unbelievable woman, and for whatever reason she took me under her wing, and she really mentored me throughout my entire university education. And I realized in that course, surrounded by all of these really brilliant women, I think it actually was an entire lecture of women, which was very empowering for me. But they were so smart, and they were so unique in their opinions, and it was such a diverse group of women. There was like a place for everybody.
Amazing.
And
it
was so inclusive. And I was just totally inspired. And so I actually feel like that started to build a sense of self and to build a sense of worth. And I started to realize, you know what, maybe I'm smart. Like, maybe I can do something.
Right. And you have a voice.
And that.
And it needs to be heard.
And that.
Wow. And so once you started to realize that, I know you shared when I first met you, sort of the next step, like, you have the Kyla Fox Center, like, and you're helping others walk through this. Well, how did you go to that next step? I want to, you know, myself as a regulated health professional, but also an entrepreneur at heart, because I want to innovate. I'm always looking for how can I help others? What can I do differently? And always staying sort of ahead of the curve. I was so intrigued by your story, because you've turned your struggle into impact. How did Kyla Fox Center begin?
Well, I was in private practice for about 10 years, and I was always working in the niche of eating disorders. It's always been my passion. And so when I would work with people, they would come into my office, and I was, you know, obviously working with them therapeutically. And sometimes I realized that, you know, someone would come in at, let's say, their lunch, but they really struggled to eat lunch. So I would be being like, well, we can just eat lunch together. And so suddenly I was doing what I call now meal support with them, or, you know, they needed something else in their life to help to sort of organize around breaking a ritual. And I would start to facilitate these things. And I started to think, like, there's so much more that people need than just seeing a therapist.
Yes.
And, you know, when you have an eating disorder, you have an eating disorder 24/7.
Yes.
You can't just pop into a therapist's office for 60 minutes a week and get well.
And food is, I mean, it sustains us. It's part of our culture.
Yes.
It's part of socialization.
Yes.
It's part of celebration. I mean, you can't get away from it.
No, and food and life are symbiotic.
Yes.
And so if you are struggling with food, then you can't integrate into life safely. And so food and life and recovery, they have to happen together. So I just was always thinking thinking like, there's so much more that I want to be able to provide people. I would send clients out to maybe see a dietitian, but the philosophy of that practitioner wasn't the same, and they would come back and feel really misunderstood. And I started to think, you know what, I need to have a place where people can go and receive, you know, holistic care and comprehensive treatment from all kinds of different professionals involving their loved ones that also helps the treatment to integrate into life. So I just started to imagine all of this in my mind, and one day I just got really tired of talking about it.
Good for you.
My parents were like, you just need to stop talking about this. And so I was like, I'm just going to stop talking about it. And then I started the center. Now, what that really meant in the initial stages was, you know, joining with some really phenomenal practitioners who would hold our clients in different ways while I held them therapeutically. And what it's turned into now, 13 years later, is an entirely different machine insofar as like really being able to cohesively and thoughtfully move people through the journey of recovery to really reach full recovery. Like, and I really sincerely mean that. I don't think the message of recovering from an eating disorder in its entirety is out in the world, and I really believe it's possible. And so I think, you know, we really believe in life and recovery happening together.
Yes.
So we work with people to help keep them in their life and to help recognize how the eating disorder infiltrates that, and to move them through their life experiences and relationships and everything you can imagine with my entire team as I oversee it to get them to the other side.
Oh, now you know why, everyone, that I wanted to have this beautiful human on our show. I'm so touched by your story and the impact that you're making and continue to make, and I'm so excited to have you part of this preventative health movement. Stick around, because we're going to come back in a moment with another segment, and we're going to welcome the person who connected us both, Dr. Christy Prouse. We're going to continue this incredible conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back here at PHAMCAST. We'll see you soon.